Hello everyone. Last week we started on the nav bar. We've been redoing the website for DevSpace, and so this week we're going to go ahead and make that responsive. We did a bunch of stuff with animations last week and I got those finished up offline, and so today we're going to make it responsive because we have the mobile side working, but on desktop it doesn't look ideal. So let's go ahead and take a look at where we were. So where we were was we have a menu button and we can go ahead and click it. And as you can see, I finished the animation and I can hover and I can pick a page and it'll take me to that page and then it'll close the nav bar. So this is what we have, which works great for mobile, but not ideal for desktop, because for desktop, I mean, yeah, on a phone or on a mobile application, it looks awesome, right? We have this, it looks very app-like. That's going to work out awesome. It gets out of the way when you don't need it. But on desktop, we don't need all that. And it's kind of annoying on desktop, I find, to go ahead and have to do the click to see your nav when you have realistically all of this real estate that we can go ahead and use. So let's take advantage of that real estate. So to get that working and with the animations, what we ended up doing last week is in our CSS, we have the menu CSS right here. I'm going to close some things and we're going to blow this up so you guys can see it better. There we go. What we end up having is we have our keyframes for opening and closing our menu, and we go ahead and navigate on closing. And if you remember, we had to do some JavaScript to close that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add some CSS for desktop, but only for desktop. So this is our base. And when you have narrower screens, you tend to stack things up and down on top of each other. When you get wider, you start having to do some layout things. You start doing some flexes and some grids. So what I like to do is I build my UIs starting my CSS with what would it look like on mobile. And then as we grow wider, I start adding too, because I find there's a lot less overrides we have to write and a lot less canceling out we have to write when we build up than when we do the opposite way and build back down again. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep our CSS the way we have it for the mobile, and we're going to go ahead and add an @media min width and anything, and we're going to set that min width. And so at this point we need to decide what are our breakover points, and there's a lot of different sizes you can use. I mean, I can put any size in here I want. But we're going to go for the kind of the media-esque. And I know from the original website that we have a number of things we need to do. So I can't go a number of links we need to put in that nav. So I can't go too small, right? Because otherwise you're going to have some weird wrapping or some overlapping. It's not going to fit. So I'm going to pick about 400 for now, 400 pixels for now. And then if that ends up being too small or too big, we'll go ahead and adjust as needed. But for now, I'm going to pick 400 pixels and we'll see where that gets us. And so as soon as we get to that 400 pixels, we're going to change the CSS based on the viewport being the same size or bigger than that. So when we look at here, the first thing we need to do is right now, when we're in just the default state, we have this button and we're hiding the nav, right? We have a display none over here somewhere. There we go. We have this header nav of display none. So we're going to make that come back. So when we're bigger than 400, I'm going to say header nav, and I'm going to go ahead and give it a display block because that will make it come back to us. So as we can see now, when I refresh, we're really wide. So we have our nav, it's visible. There's a lot wrong with it because it's styled as if we were, in mobile. In mobile, we're not overwriting. We shouldn't be overwriting. I'm going to close it. There we go. Obviously, our functionality is a little wonky now, right? We may have to go a little wider than 400. Let's find out. I'm going to do inspect. There's this really cool toggle in your DevTools over here. If you click here, depending on what you have set up, some of them for me give me, and that depends on your OS, and that probably depends on the browser you're using. I'm using Chrome, but some of them will give you the nice phone thing, which is cool for screenshots if you ever need them. But right now, and so we can still see this still works. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the responsive one, because the responsive allows me to type in a number. So we have our 600 by 814. So I want to see at 300, what do we look like? We're good. And if I click 399, you'll see we're still the same. But if I click 400, now we can see that that is where we show up. So that's pretty cool. That's still a little small. Maybe we'll go a little bit bigger. Let's see if I do 500. Yeah, maybe we'll change this to 500. Okay. So now that we have that display, we do a lot of things to be able to get this animation to work. We see that when it's open, we go ahead and give it, we have some display absolutes. We have some display fixed. Our header being flexed, we don't care about right this second, but we see over here when we're open, we have all of this junk going on. We have a height set, we have an absolute set. We need to kill some of that. But because what we want to do is we want it to lay normally within the flow. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a position relative. I could also go position initial. That would work too. So now I'm going to be able to see, and I'm going to go back to a normal view. There we go. So now we have this is relative, so we're in good shape. We want to hide this button, right? Because we don't need it anymore, right? This button doesn't need to exist, and this button doesn't need to exist. So we know that our two buttons, which if we look at our HTML, we have a menu button over here. It's a class of it's a class menu button, and in the nav it's also a class menu button. It's inside of a class closed, but both of them are class menu buttons. So what I can say is, hey, as soon as I'm this big, my menu buttons need to go away. So that will get rid of our buttons. So we should start seeing, there we go. So now we have our menu is stacked up and down, right? We want it vertical. It is vertical, we want it horizontal. So let's go ahead and deal with that. So we know that our header nav, which is a list, and we definitely want our nav to be a list because that makes accessibility technologies makes it a lot easier for them to be able to navigate through things. A number of those assistive technologies have ways of navigating by tag. So for example, nav has a semantic meaning in HTML. If you use a nav tag, it assumes that it's going to be some kind of navigation. Same with the list. If you use a UL or a list, it's going to know that, hey, this is a list and it has a certain number of list items, and it will announce that to the user. So that we definitely want to make sure that when we build our navigations, we use those tags in order to help users that are using assistive technologies be able to navigate our sites. So we're going to take that list, that UL, and we're going to go ahead and make that, we're going to make it horizontal again. So to do that, we're going to take our header nav menu, header nav UL, and we're going to go do a display flex. Let's see what that gives us. So now we're back to something that's starting to look like something, right? We do need to get rid of these borders, right? Because we don't need these borders. I had put them in the mobile version to nicely, and we'll have to, on window resize, we're going to have some fun to make it do the right thing on window resize. Why is it not taking medium and width? Yeah. Why is it low? Not responding correctly. That's interesting. Let's check using our dev tools. Let's make sure we're on home, because I know some of the API calls are a little wonky because I had to do some things to make it work locally. So let's make sure we're on home, because I fixed all of them on home from running locally So I don't know that I finished fixing them everywhere else. And let's use our mobile. Yeah. So it is working here. We're good there. Okay, cool. Excuse me. So now we're going to get rid of our lines, right? Our borders. And so our borders are on our LIs, if I remember correctly, right? We have a border color on our LI. And our last of type has a bottom one as well. So we're going to make sure to get rid of that. So on our header LIs, or list item, I'm going to give it a border none. That should make it go away. Refresh. And we still have that one at the bottom right here, because we need to be a little bit more specific, because over here we're saying header UL last of type, and that is more specific than what I'm doing below, which is header. Okay, so let's just use the same. I'm going to add, there we go. We're going to format that just a little bit better, make it easier to read later. All right. So now we have gotten rid of all of our elements. So if we look at where we're at, we have our entire header, right, is flexed. We also have our UL that's flat, our nav that's flexed. That's fine. So now we can go ahead and kind of format that just a tad bit better and make sure that, see, one of the problems we have is as we get smaller, our nav is still too long. There's still too many elements compared to what, so we're going to have to make that bigger. So we're going to have to go ahead and increase that a bit, or we can change how we lay it out as well. But I think we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to up that a bit, because we don't want some weird overflow. So we are at, in order to have everything, we're at 840. So let's go ahead and do, just in case we change navigation at some point, we're going to go do 900. There we go. So now on our wide screens, we go ahead and have our login. Now what's interesting is we tend to revert to flex, which is what I did here, in order to do some of our navigations. But in this use case, there's not a huge need to be flexed in here. What I am going to do though is, so the individual ULs are flex, the UL is flex, which means I'm going to add a gap of 1 rem. The advantage of doing a gap versus adding margin between our LIs, and 1 rem may be a little big, is that it doesn't actually add margin to the left and to the right at the beginning and at the end. It only does it in between elements. So look at how we're styled. We have a lot of padding around our anchor tags. That's so that we have a nice clickable area. That's a good thing. We have our LI and we have our LI, and see between them we have a gap. But if I take my first one, see, it puts a gap between things, and we don't have to worry about extra spacing, like pushing us from the edge when we're using gap versus putting margin on the LI. Now what I want to do is I want to get this dev space to be at the same, to have the same baseline as these guys, or to at least be aligned a little bit better. So what I'm going to do on this one, where we have the header being flexed, we're already aligned center. That's good. And so now we're going to align this guy center. And now, okay, we must have some margin somewhere. RH1 probably? No. Let's look at the entire header. That's looking pretty good. Oh, it's because of the padding. That makes sense. And we definitely want to keep that padding. So instead of this, we're going to do baseline. that did not do the trick. Let's see if we can't align baseline up here. Baseline is where the base of the writing is. So if I were to draw a line, there we go, that's better. So see, if I were to draw a line over here, now you see it's kind of like all of our words are kind of sitting on a clothesline, right? That's what baseline allows. So regardless of the space or the size of our text, it allows me to align everything to this line so that my text isn't like one here and then one floating up here and then one floating down here, even though things have padding and margin and whatnot. So now we have a nav that looks really good in desktop and in mobile. There's one little thing we're going to do, and I'll do this offline because it can be a little tedious. But one thing we're going to have to do is if I have this open, as you can see, once I get bigger, it's going to have this weird overlay, right? There's going to be some weirdness going on. And so generally what I do to get rid of that and to deal with that is I go ahead and on window resize, I auto close the nav just to make sure that we don't end up with this situation right here. All right. So now that we have a header, we have a nav, the next thing I want to do is deal with this logo. Generally speaking, we're going to see a logo up here. Where it says dev space. So I'm going to go ahead and move this logo to replace this dev space so that we have the nice stereotypical logo top left. People know when they come to our site, users know that hey, this is going to be, this is the logo, this is the company that we're dealing with, or in this case, the conference that we're dealing with. So to do that, we're going to go back into our HTML. We're going to go find this image, which is going to be in our index somewhere. There it is. It says dev space logo. We're going to go ahead and copy that. We're going to go back to our menu. And in our H1, it is a link. It's a link back to the home page. We're going to leave that, but we're going to replace it with our image. And we're going to go ahead and we have alt text, which is good. And this will tell our assistive technology users, this will tell them what the image is of. So now we have our logo up here. And so now we just need to style it in terms of height and size, kind of shrink it a little bit because it's a little overkill at the moment. We're going to go ahead and let's see, how big are we right now? We are 201 by 182. That's a lot. We are going to go ahead and do, let's look at what it would look like at, say, 200. And this is also going to, I was about to put it in our desktop, but this is also going to affect our mobile, see? So we definitely want to make sure that this happens for everybody. So we have an H1, which has no padding, cool. Let's go ahead and put it here. And we're going to say header.image. And I think the image had an actual name. Had an ID of logo. I'm going to give it a class of logo. I don't like using IDs for styling because IDs are extremely specific and are really hard to override. So we're going to, we don't want to use IDs for our classes. They work great in JavaScript because they're unique, but for CSS, they're not ideal. Oh, hey, Freestyle Coder, how's it going? What did you miss? Well, you missed us doing looking at mobile versus desktop. So right now we have a nice mobile nav that kind of slides in and out. We finished it offline from last week because I don't know if you remember, animations were being a little tedious last week, and so now we're dealing with making it responsive, which we have, and we're putting the logo in the top left hand corner. So we need to decrease that logo size, and so we're going to do width 200 pixels. So one thing you don't want to do is put a height and a width, because you're going to skew your image unless your ratio is absolutely correct. So if I were to put like a height and a width, let's say I want to pretend that it's square, which we established earlier it's not. If I did this, you're gonna see I'm gonna skew this image something terrible, see? And we don't want to do that, especially not to our logos, because our tech our brand managers and our designers and be like, oh no, please don't. So let's go ahead and remove that. Fill out my MVP info. Yay, cool. That sounds awesome. So I thought you already were in the MVP stuff. So now we need to go ahead and realign this because we did a baseline earlier, right? So now we don't really have a baseline to fill out. So we're gonna do middle. Or center. Is it center or is it middle? Because that went, I think it's might be center. Some properties in CSS are center, some property are middle, and I can never remember which ones are which. And there we go. And my IE, as you can tell, isn't smart enough to tell me which one is which most of the time. So now we have, this is still really big for what we're looking for. We may actually do it. So one of the funny things with flex is that you don't do top and bottom, you do flex start and flex end. So we're gonna do that. I kind of think this will look nicer. Yeah. And we're gonna make that logo still a tidbit smaller because we can reuse it. It's not because it's in the header that we can't reuse it other places. Oh, that blows. I'm sorry to hear that that wasn't happening. Well, I wish you the best of luck. Let me know if you need anything on that, if I can put in a good word or whatever. I'd be happy to help. Now that's really small. There's got to be a happy medium somewhere. Let's do 125. And there we go. Okay, so now that we know that this image is going to be 125, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm seeing 125 by 80.9. So 125 by 81. So one of the things I'm going to do here in our nav is I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to give it a height and a width. That's the width. We said 81. And the width is 125. Because that will decrease our reflow and it will help with our load time. So, oh, you're gonna get Betsy. She's awesome. I'm under Betsy too, so. Cause she's, I think, I think you're far enough east that you'd be under Betsy. Yeah. So, yeah. Let's go back to, I know I'm not making up my mind on this. Let's go ahead and keep this in the center. And then we'll move on. I'll probably change my mind again at some point. Yep, that was. There we go. Okay, so now we have, and it should look okay on desktop, right? Because we didn't do a whole lot different that way on desktop versus mobile. And as you can see, we can still click it. It still totally works. So now we can start focusing on content a little bit, something I've been woefully ignoring up until now. And so we have a lot of text. And the thing with this website specifically is that it's a conference. And conferences, if you're not in the conference world, you may not know, but they have seasons. So there's each conference kind of goes through a very similar pattern of you're looking for sponsors, you're looking for speakers, you're looking for attendees. And so each of these are kind of going to be on the forefront of this page at any given point in time. So what we essentially want is we're going to want a call to action. We have some informational things, but we're also going to see here where it says call for speakers, call for sponsors. And depending on the time of year, these are going to change. So what we're going to want to do is make sure that we have very clear call to action so that when we're looking for speakers, when we're looking for sponsors, when it's time, you know, when we want attendees to show up because and to sign up because, hey, we've got our lineup, we've got our talks, we know what we're talking about, like this is really cool. We want to make sure that we have that kind of in the forefront. So let's look at the order of our HTML in our index page. I'm going to close some stuff. So the first thing we do is kind of introduce what this is. And hey, Freestyle Coder, whenever you get a chance, you said you might have some pics from previous ones. That'd be super cool. But what we can do here is kind of introduce what it is, right? We kind of want to tell our users, what is this? So we have, I'm going to and this, I'm probably going to replace this logo with something like one of the images of the conference to kind of show, hey, this is a thing with people that actually, no worries. We weren't there. I didn't think we were going to get this far today. So I didn't remind you. So we're all good. So what we're going to do is, let's see. The first thing we need to do is get some padding and some margin around here, right? We're right tucked up against the edge. That's not going to work in mobile or in desktop, right? We want to get that space going on between the two. So let's see how we're looking. Each of these is an article tags, which is not, these are definitely what they are. So that's perfectly fine. So let's go ahead and give some and we have a section tag. What we're really missing here is kind of a main tag. Like, where is the bulk of our content? Because we're going to have some things like, if we look at our page, and this is kind of something you want to think through when you're deciding on the layout for an application, is what types of content do you have? So each of these can be called an article, could be called a section. That's kind of up to you. But then we have we have mailing lists, we have tweets, we have the sponsor, we have a donate, and we have a direct and a PayPal direct. These at this point are not really content anymore. These at this point are more, haha, that's funny. Are not, they're more of an aside, right? And we actually do have a tag for that. So the first thing I'm gonna do is we're gonna go find those things and we're gonna go ahead and put them as an aside. So over here, as you can see, I was talking about seasons, right? Here's the ticket price information, and that's commented out for now. So now we have a left sidebar and a right sidebar. So the original site, the one we're redoing, right, has a sidebar on both sides. I'm going to take it down to only having one sidebar to kind of declutter a little bit and to make it a little bit easier to find what we're looking for. So what we're going to do is we're going to have our main section. Where does this content section finish? Okay, it does. Okay, so this content section is actually going to be, I'm just going to remain that main. That is our main. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take these two guys in here. And remember, we're using a templating system, right? So these aren't actually comment. These are part of our template. And this is going to be our aside. Because this is all extra information. It's cool information, and it's information that we definitely want and is important, but it is not the meat and potatoes of our page per se. So let's save that. So this is going to be absolutely no change because very similar to a div, except for main and aside have semantic meaning, very similar to a div, they have no styling, base styling to speak of. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take those two things, and we're in mobile. This is good. We're good, right? We don't, we want to keep them stacked. Stacked is good. We can't try to do any kind of, you know, side by side on mobile devices. However, on desktop, right, once we get nice and wide, we definitely want to maybe make better use of our space. The other thing to keep in mind when you're dealing with wider screens is that your line length is going to matter. Once you get too long or too wide, it becomes very hard to start. I'm going to read it. I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to go ahead and make this really big. Like if I do 2000 wide, right? If we take this line right here, right, it's going to be really hard to follow. So we want to make sure that our, I'm going to go back to a normal kind of size-ish. We want to make sure that if we're not going to do a multi-column kind of system, that we cap those line lengths. So what we're going to do is a multi-column system. So again, we're going to go in our main probably. I'm going to find our master CSS. And I'm going to say that, hey, media. So let's look at where a good cutover point for this is. And once we're done, what I usually do is I figure out where a good layers for my cutover points are. I'm going to put them in, and then I'm going to go find all of them and kind of standardize them. So I've kind of put them ideally where I kind of like them initially. And then I figure out, okay, if I have a cutover point out on one page at 100 and one at 120, where I'm going to, average those out. I'm not going to leave random, because at some point when you're doing testing, your QA is going to hate you if they have 50 bazillion different cutover points to go check to make sure that UI is working. So once I kind of figure out the layout, what I'm going to do is go through and standardize those down to probably 3. You'll have your mobile view, you'll have your tablet or small screen view, because some of the tablets at this point have ridiculous resolution. So it's kind of a misnomer to call it tablet. So I'm going to call it small screen view versus your large screen views. So let's go ahead and figure out. So we know we put our cutover for our nav at, what did we put it at? 300, 900 and something? We put it at 900, I think. Yeah. So let's go ahead and put it at 900 as well. Min width 900 pixels. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take that content, right? Because we have a div of content. If I go back over here, we have our main and we have our body. And what else is in our body? We don't have a footer. Okay, that makes my life a whole lot easier because I can just flex the body. Yeah. And we're going to flex the body. Now this is going to do some really fun stuff on our other pages, because right now this CSS page this styles page is getting applied everywhere. We're not in a component-based system where we have encapsulated CSS, so we'll have to see what happens to our other pages. We may have to give some class names to prevent it from working everywhere. So we're going to do a display flex. Actually, this might be a good time to do a display grid, because that will allow me to control the sides of my side. So we're going to do a grid template columns. And that's how we're going to figure out what our columns are going to look like. So we want 2 columns, right? So we want, and so what I'm going to use is the FR unit, which is a fraction unit. So I'm going to say that I want my, and I'm going to use odd numbers simply because to do 1 3/4, 1 1/4, kind of, it looks good, but if we kind of play with the golden ratio and those sorts of things, it looks better. So we're going to do a 5FR and a 3FR. Let's look at what that looks like. That is very wide. Did I do it backwards? No, I shouldn't have. Why? Okay, grid template columns. Okay. Let's bring that down. Oh, I have extra white space. That's not helping anything either. Let's see now. What do we have? Why is it doing it this way? This part should be 3 times as big as, this should take, because if we take the total, right? I did 5 and 2, so it's 7 segments. So this one should be 5 of 7. This one should be 2 of 7. So I'm not sure what it's decided to do. Yeah. Let's find out. Where's our body? There's our header. Oh, because we have our header in the mix too. Yeah, I forgot about the header. Okay, we're not gonna be able to do it this way. So we have our main. Because we have the menu, that's why it's acting funny. Okay. Div class equals container. I'm gonna add a container. I forgot that we had the nav in there, so we have our header in there, and that is what's causing our issues. So all of this needs to go inside of our container. And our side. And now we're gonna close that. And now we're gonna say container. And now our random stuff is not gonna act funny anymore. There we go, because we have this header. I had done the grid on the body. This header and nav and everything is part of our body. And so what I was catching that in our grid, and that is why it wasn't working nicely. So we have now this 2-column layout. We have our main information piece, right? And we have our aside, which is the mailing list and the tweets and the sponsors and the donate. But as you can see, these two are really close together, right? We've got a lot, like we don't want these touching that close. So same as what we did for Flex earlier, we're gonna go ahead and do a gap. And I don't necessarily care. We only have one row in our grid, right? We just have the 2 columns. We can do row gaps. We don't really care, but we definitely care about column gaps. So if I say just gap, it'll apply it to row and column. Or if I want to be more specific, I can say, hey, grid column gap, which is going to be the gap between our columns. I want you to have, let's say, 3 rem. Let's give you some breathing room. We've got room. There's no reason to skimp on it. There we go. And so now we actually have room between our content. That is already getting much nicer. The other thing we're going to want to do is we're still butt up to both ends, right? And this is true in desktop and in mobile. So now when we go to mobile, we're all stacked. Beautiful. When we go to desktop or to wider screens, we have the 2 layers. Beautiful. Or the 2 columns. And so now we want to move this away from our edges. So we're going to say that container, whether we're in mobile or not, right? So we're going to do it outside of our media query, is going to go ahead and have some margin. So up and down, I don't want any margin. We're fine there. But I do want left and right. So up and down is my first number. Left and right is my second number. There we go. And so now we're in a little bit. That's much nicer. Much, much, much nicer. Okay. So now that we have that going on, let's try to find our calls to action, like call to sponsor, call for speakers. Those are important things, right? Those are things that we definitely want to announce to the world very much when they happen. So let's take the call for sponsors one, for example. Let's go find our call for sponsors, call for speakers, call for sponsors. And what I'm going to go ahead and do, and these realistically, changes to 2021. What if it's dev space? This stays put. This will probably get yoinked next year, right? Because this was specifically related to in-person versus not, which hopefully we don't have to deal with next year. Dates for 21 announced. So this will end up being a call. This will end up being a, let's try to classify these. This will end up being a important info maybe. So we're gonna call this one info. Or let's call it news. Right? This is like, hey, we've got news for you. So we're gonna give it a class news. I'm making semantic names because it's really important. If I called this announcement, like the next one on the next screen, that's gonna have a similar purpose or a similar need. I don't like, I don't want to recreate 50 classes. I just want this type of information gets this, you know, gets this styling, this type of information, whatever. Call to sponsors is definitely a call to action because we want you to sponsor. So we're going to call class equals a call to action. And you'll notice I don't use capitals in CSS because there's intricacies with capital letters, and sometimes it's case sensitive and sometimes it's not, and it's not always particularly predictable when it's going to be and when it's not. So for my class names, I will never use capital letters to prevent that from ever being an issue. So this is the call for speakers is definitely a call to actions. Ticket prices, this is just informational. There's no, there is no, if we look at, I know it might be a little bit hard to read, but this is purely informational. So we're going to go ahead and give that one a class, even though we can't see it right now. Of news or info, did we have? That's actually, yeah, it's not really news, it's just info. And those are a different beast entirely. All right, so now let's go ahead and I'm going to focus on the call to sponsors and the call for speakers because we definitely want those to pop, right? When we're ready for that, we want those to pop. So anything that's a call to action, I'm going to make one big class for that. I'm going to call it call to action, right? It's the same thing we put in there. And every time we have a call to action, remember we have some colors. This is a good time to kind of give a pop of color. We have a primary and an accent. We have a primary of the blue, and we have an accent, which I went for a teal because when you look at, I went to the NASA website, which is really cool. They have a bunch of really cool pictures from like Hubble. And a lot of those pictures, if you look at the nebulas and stuff, have a lot of this kind of deep blue in them. So if we're going to keep with the space theme a little bit, I went ahead and went with that to go with our blue. They're side by side in the color wheel, so they're adjacent to each other. They'll fit well together and they'll complement each other really nicely. So we're going to go ahead and say, hey, it's a call to action. Let's give it a border, and we're going to go ahead and use we're going to use a gradient in that border because why not? And it's, you can see a lot of in space. If we look at the space things, nothing is ever just one solid color. It always has that variation. So I'm going to do a gradient on this, and we're going to go ahead and say we're going to do a border. So our border style is going to be solid. Our border width is going to be 1px. But instead of doing a border color, we're going to do a border image. And then we're going to go ahead and do a linear gradient. And with that, we're going to say, we're going to take our primary color and our accent color, right? And we're going to go ahead and stick that one in our linear gradient. So I lost where I was typing. There we go. Linear gradient, primary, var, accent. Go ahead and do the one. Okay. So now if I refresh, we have, and it's a little subtle. We may want to make it bigger. Let me go ahead and make it bigger so you guys can see it better. Let's say 5, and we're going to give these guys a margin bottom to separate them out. Okay. As we can see, we have some variation. It's not very obvious. So let's go ahead and kind of push it just a little bit. So I'm going to do this right here. Go find our colors. We're going to adjust it just a tad. I'm going to take this primary color and I'm going to lighten it just a tad, or maybe darken it. We're going to go the other way around. I'm going to take the primary color and I'm going to darken it. There we go. And we're going to darken it a lot. And we're going to take our accent color. And as you can notice when I'm doing this, I'm simply changing the amount of white and black in my color. I'm just not changing the color itself. So what I mean by that is when we're dealing with brand colors, as long as I'm playing in this view, I'm good because I'm staying with the same hue. I'm just adding more white or adding more black, right? That's all I'm doing. I'm adjusting the white and the black, but it's the same color. It's the same hue. Think of, if we were to think of it in terms of materials, it's the same pigment. If as soon as I start sliding on the rainbow, now I'm changing my hue and I'm changing my color. That's not a good thing for brand colors. So in this case, I'm just playing here. So it's not going to look like a barf had a part, like a clown barfed off some Skittles on my UI and put every color of the rainbow on my UI if I stick to playing in this view. All right, so now we have a much lighter version. I'm not exactly sure where I dropped it. We'll find out. That's looking like something. So now we have the border over here, right? We have our dark on top and our border on bottom. I want to skew it. I want it at an angle. So I'm going to go ahead and say my linear gradient. I actually want it at 45 degrees. Oh, and I broke it. Oh, I broke it. Oh, degrees. There we go. So now we have this corner. We can skew it a little bit more. We're also going to back up on the width. I'm going to do our 1 pixels like we meant to do. And we're going to go ahead and give it some padding as well. Get our text out from over there. There we go. So now we're starting to look like something. And it's not very, so the thing with gradients, they're really cool as an effect if they're done subtly. For those who remember when CSS3 first came out with drop shadow, front-end developers, we had a tendency to put them everywhere because it was the cool new toy. Same with border radius. There was a handful of things that came out with CSS3 that were just like the cool new toy of the year. And so they were things that were getting put everywhere. And visually speaking, some of those designs are quite regrettable. But it was the cool new toy of the day, right? So doing the gradient in the border is really cool. But again, it's something that needs to be done with finesse and not absolutely everywhere. Otherwise, it completely kills the effect, if that makes any sense. So the next thing we're going to do is, as much as we have, hey, call for sponsors, this is important. We have what it's about. This and the link being in here is awesome, but it's not very maybe visible per se. It's really easy to miss. So in this case, we're going to add a button inside our call to actions. And this will I'll have to go through the HTML and find them all to go ahead and really accentuate the idea of what we're doing here, right? So underneath in our, like, let's say we're card of sponsors, we'll do it on this one. And this is a link. So we're going to take that link and we're going to style it as a button because links have specific semantic meanings and buttons have specific semantic meaning, and we don't want to mix and match those. Links take you places versus buttons perform an action, right? And we want to keep that nice and separate. It's an internal link, so I don't really need to, I'm not going to put a target, a target, and we're going to go ahead and say sponsor dev space. There you go. So now, and we're going to call this, there we go. So now we have our extra link right here. Now we're going to style it. We're going to make it pop. So I'm going to call that a call to action as well, or our call to, or we're just going to call that our action from our call to action. That works well. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and style our action inside it. So we have a call to action, and inside of that call to action, we have an action. I'm gonna make that look a little bit more button-like. And since I really want it to pop compared to everything else around it, I'm gonna use the accent color for it. So I'm gonna say, I'm gonna display it inline block. So it still kind of behaves like an inline element, but I can give it padding and margin and stuff. So we're gonna display inline block. I'm gonna do a background var accent. We're going to do a color. We should have a foreground color somewhere. Do I have an accent contrast? I do not have an accent contrast yet. Let's go ahead and create that. That way when we create the... I totally misspelled that. Contrast, not contract. White. There we go. Okay. We have an accent contrast in our primary contrast. So that way when we create a dark theme, it'll be really easy to flip those. There we go. We'll give it some padding. And let's see what this puppy looks like now. Now we're starting to look like something, right? We still are going to go ahead and need to give it a hover, right? We're going to want a hover effect. So, and again, we want to make sure that we're using hover and focus, right? Because that way, if you're tabbing through the application, you can still find it, and you can still see where you are. Okay. And so we have this very much operating like a button. So I'm going to go ahead and take the text decoration off on this particular one, right? When we're looking at it from here, when I don't really need that text decoration. And we definitely don't want to bring it back once we're hovering and focusing. What we do want to do is change the background. So we're going to do background color. Do we have an accent hover? We have a primary hover, but we do not have an accent hover. So let's go ahead and create that. I'm going to take these two and go put them with the primary. That way it's a little bit easier to find later. There we go. There we go. And then we're going to do accent hover. And we're going to take the same color and play with that little, you know, the amount of white and the amount of black we put in it again. So on hover, I want you to pop. Yeah. There we go. There we go. So now we need to go ahead and apply it. And we should be in decent shape. Oh, I'm in this view this way. I don't have hover in there. There we go. We still don't have hover. That's interesting. Why are we not hovering? Oh, because our action is the anchor tag, right? So I need to put that directly on our action. There we go. Okay. And now the last thing I want to do is that call to action. I want it front and center. I want it in the middle. Okay. So we're going to have to tweak our HTML just a little bit again. Like Not that you're more than likely to have more than one call to action in your call to action, but ooh, that's not what I meant to do. But just for good measure, we'll call it actions, just in case you do, for whatever reason, have to or more, although not recommended. And we're going to go ahead and add our actions. And this can be for anyone, really, any of the different sections that we have. And we're going to go ahead and say text align center. Because this is still an inline block, so it will go ahead and take that text align. And now we're in the middle. Sweet. So now we have a call to sponsor. So we have our call to sponsor. It pops a lot more than it did before, right? We have our call to action. The thing is, we can see we have a little bit of a margin up here and not so much down here. So that's related because this header tag has margin, which is pushing it, right? It's an H1, but not on the bottom. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make this an H2. Realistically, your page, like what your page is about, is going to be your H1, and everything else is going to trickle down from here. So in this case, this right here, North Alabama's Premier Polyglot Technology Conference, is a really good H1. Everything else, these guys, should really be H2s or lower, depending on which one it is. So let's go ahead and change that here. So this one is definitely an H2. This one is also an H2. These are all going to be H2s. H2. H2. There you go. H1, that's good. This is more details. We'll get into why I don't like this. Not today, because we're running out of time. But this is information about the conference, not so much headers. They're not naming a section. They're not naming a piece of content, right? They're details about the conference. So we'll tweak that in a later stream. Let's finish up our call to action. So now that we have that as an H2, we're still going to have that weird padding thing, right? We have this as an H2. Did I save? Yeah, I saved. Okay. We still have this as an H2 if I inspect. And so that H2 still has margin, right? That margin top. So I'm going to say that, hey, in my call to action, in my CSS, in my call to action, I want my H2 to have a margin top of 0. I still want it to have that margin bottom, right? I still want it to be away from my text a little bit, but I don't want it, I want the amount of space all the way around in my box to be the same. And so now what we're going to go ahead and do is add a little bit more padding, I think, because it could use a little bit more breathing room. I gave it a padding of 1 rem. We're going to go with 2. Let's see what that does. That's nice. That looks nice. And so there we go. So now what we'll probably want to do is move these on the page to be a lot higher up, because that's what we want people to look at. That's what we want people to do. Burying it below the fold is not going to be ideal for what we're doing. So we'll probably look at that next time, as well as the structure of these guys, which should definitely not be headers. All right. And with that, I think that's going to be the end of our stream for today. Thank you all for joining. I really appreciate you coming and hanging out with me while we redo the website. And I hope to see you again soon. Happy coding.